The void-wing Leviathan shuddered as it lay dying on the vast alien desert. Its massive obsidian wings, normally folded into hyperdimensional space, now sprawled across kilometers of crystalline sand, sending iridescent particles into the atmosphere with each labored breath. Beneath the two setting moons, the ship creature's skin flickered with failing bioluminescence, patterns of blue and violet that had once guided interstellar diplomats through the darkest regions of space. Mason Reed wiped sweat from his brow and squinted at the dying behemoth. The desert heat reminded him of summer days back in New Mexico, though the pale green sky and those twin moons were a constant reminder that he was a long, long way from home. "You said this thing's a spaceship." Mason adjusted his faded baseball cap and took a swig from his canteen. His weathered hands, stained with decades of motor oil and grime, rested on the toolbox he'd insisted on bringing. Ambassador Xylophia's translucent appendages rippled with agitation. Standing nearly 7 feet tall, her form shimmered like water-given shape, catching the dying sunlight in mesmerizing patterns. "The void-wing Leviathan is not merely a thing, Mr. Reed," she replied, her voice melodious despite her obvious stress. "It is a semi-sentient biomechanical marvel, one of only 9 in existence, and the diplomatic flagship of the Galactic Concordant." Mason nodded, trying to look like this wasn't the craziest thing that had ever happened to him. 24 hours ago, he'd been fixing a transmission on a '79 Chevy at his garage in Socorro. Now he was standing on an alien world with a creature that spoke perfect English despite having no visible mouth, staring at what looked like a dying dragon the size of an aircraft carrier. "And these other folks?" Mason gestured toward the cluster of beings hovering near what appeared to be an entrance to the ship, a sphincter-like opening that pulsed weakly. "The finest engineering minds in the Concordant," Xylophia said. "They have been attempting repairs for 7 cycles. Mason studied the aliens. One appeared to be made entirely of shifting metallic plates, a walking tin man without the charm. Another was just a swirling cloud of luminous particles contained in what looked like a transparent hazmat suit. Several crystalline beings stood apart, their faceted bodies occasionally emitting high-pitched sounds that made Mason's teeth ache. "And you picked me up because—" Mason let the question hang in the air. "Because humans have a reputation," Xylophia said, her form pulsing with what might have been embarrassment. "Your species possesses an uncanny ability to repair technologies you do not fully understand, using methods that defy conventional engineering logic." Mason laughed. "You mean we're good at duct taping things together until they work?" The ambassador's upper portion quivered in what Mason was beginning to recognize as agreement. "That is a simplification, but essentially correct. The Concordant has been monitoring Earth for centuries. Your species' ingenuity when faced with limited resources is remarkable." Mason hoisted his toolbox. "Well, let's see what we're dealing with. But I gotta say, Ambassador, I usually charge by the hour, and I'm not sure what the galactic exchange rate is for USD. If you can repair the Leviathan within 19 of your Earth days, preventing an interstellar diplomatic crisis that would result in the deaths of billions, the Concordant will compensate you with the equivalent of 1 million of your dollars." Mason whistled. "That'd buy a lot of duct tape." "Is that acceptance of our terms?" Mason stared up at the enormous creature ship. Something inside him, the same instinct that had guided him through mechanical problems since he was 8 years old, stirred with curiosity and challenge. "Yeah," he said. "I'm in, but I work alone, and I do things my way. That will be difficult for the others to accept," Xylophia warned. "Then they better get used to disappointment," Mason replied, already walking toward the entrance. "Let's get started. I want to see this thing's engine." As Mason approached, the cluster of alien engineers turned to regard him. The metal-plated being stepped forward, its surface rearranging to form what Mason assumed was a face. "This is the human." The voice emerged like metal scraping on metal. It carries primitive tools and appears physically inadequate. Mason grinned. Nice to meet you too, Tin Man. The cloud being emitted a series of whistles that Mason's translator rendered as laughter. The human utilizes cultural references as defensive mechanisms. Fascinating. Mr. Reed, Ambassador Xylophia intervened. These are Chief Engineers Kallax, Mysterial, and the Phoric Collective. She indicated the metal being, the cloud, and the crystalline entities respectively. They have been attempting to restore the Leviathan's quantum heart engine for several cycles without success. Mason nodded to each, then gestured to the pulsing entrance. That the way in? The metal being, Kallax, made a sound like a hydraulic press failing. The human cannot simply enter the Leviathan. There are protocols, decontamination procedures, neural interfacing requirements. Look, Mason interrupted. You folks have been at this for a week with no luck. I've got 19 days to fix your ship or people die. So either get out of my way or find another human with a socket wrench. The crystalline beings emitted a harmonic resonance that made Mason's fillings hurt. The cloud being, Mysterial, expanded slightly. Let it proceed, Mysterial said. Its failure will at least be educational. Kallax's plates shifted in what Mason interpreted as resignation. Very well, but we observe all procedures. The human will be fitted with a neural interface and contaminant barrier. 20 minutes later, Mason found himself wearing what felt like a second skin, a transparent film that covered him from neck to toe, and sporting a small silver disc at his temple that occasionally gave him flashes of information about his surroundings. This neural thing giving me ship schematics? He asked as they entered the cavernous interior of the Leviathan. Rudimentary ones only, Kallax replied. Your primitive neural structure cannot handle full schematics. Mason ignored the insult and whistled as he took in the ship's interior. It was like standing inside a cathedral designed by someone who'd only heard cathedrals described in fairy tales. Ribbed arches of what looked like bone stretched overhead, interwoven with pulsing veins of light. The floor beneath them felt warm and slightly yielding, like walking on living tissue. This is live? Mason asked. The Leviathan is a synthesis, Xylophia explained as they moved deeper into the ship. Part grown, part constructed. Its systems are both mechanical and biological, integrated at the quantum level. Like a cyborg dragon, Mason murmured. Cool. They descended through what seemed like a digestive tract, passing chambers where other aliens worked on various systems. Some areas were brightly lit with what appeared to be bioluminescent fungi. Others were dark except for the glow of instrumentation. The further they went, the more Mason noticed a smell, like ozone and hot metal, with an underlying sweetness that reminded him of antifreeze. Finally, they reached what could only be the heart of the ship. A massive chamber opened before them, dominated by a spherical structure that pulsed with irregular light. Surrounding it were dozens of alien technicians, manipulating holographic interfaces and adjusting what looked like crystalline growths that emerged from the walls. The sphere itself, which Mason assumed was the quantum heart engine they'd mentioned, was clearly in distress. Instead of a steady pulse, it flickered erratically, with dark patches spreading across its surface like necrotic tissue. System status, Kallax demanded of a nearby technician. Deteriorating, came the response. Quantum coherence at 27% and falling. Neural pathways showing increased resistance. The Leviathan is rejecting our repairs. Rejecting? Mason asked, moving closer to the sphere. Like an immune response? The cloud being Mysterial, expanded slightly. An apt if simplistic analogy. The Leviathan systems are indeed responding as if to an invasive pathogen. Mason circled the quantum heart, ignoring the suspicious glances from the alien technicians. His fingers itched to touch it, to feel the vibrations and temperature. the way he'd diagnose an engine back home, but he suspected that might be a quick way to get himself killed or ejected. What changed? He asked instead. When did it start failing? The crystalline beings, the Phoric collective, emitted a series of tones that Mason's neural interface translated as, after transit through the Kandarian sector, 18 cycles ago. Mason nodded, pieces clicking together in his mind. And what's in the Kandarian sector? A crystalline nebula, Xylophia supplied. The Leviathan took a diplomatic delegation through it for the annual confluence. Did you scan for debris afterward? Micro-impacts? Kallax's plates shifted dismissively. Of course, standard procedure. Nothing significant detected. Mason's eyes narrowed as he studied the dark patches on the heart engine. They seemed to follow a pattern, spreading along what looked like major conduits. Show me your scans, he said, and I want to see the exterior hull where it would have faced the nebula during transit. 3 hours later, Mason stood on a maintenance platform extending from the Leviathan's side, examining a section of the ship's hull through a magnifying lens he'd brought in his toolbox. The alien engineers hovered nearby, their skepticism almost palpable. There, Mason said, pointing to what looked like a tiny crystalline splinter embedded in the hull. And there, and there. He indicated dozens of similar spots, barely visible to the naked eye. Kallax leaned in, plates reconfiguring to extend some kind of scanning appendage. Micro-debris, insignificant. Our scans showed these, but they're too small to cause systemic failure. Mason shook his head. Size isn't everything. Tin Man. These aren't just sitting on the surface. They've penetrated the hull. Look. He carefully extracted one of the splinters with a pair of tweezers, revealing a tiny hole beneath. Your ship's been hit by what? Thousands of these? 217,462 detected impacts. The Phoric collective chimed. Right, Mason continued. And you said this ship is partly biological. So what happens when you get thousands of tiny splinters in your system? Mysterial's cloud form contracted slightly. Inflammation. Immune response. Exactly. Mason placed the extracted crystal into a small container from his toolkit. Your ship is having an allergic reaction. These crystals got into its system through these micropunctures, and now its body is fighting what it sees as an infection by shutting down pathways. Xylophia's form rippled with excitement. This is why the neural pathways show increased resistance. The Leviathan is attempting to isolate the foreign bodies. Which means, Mason continued, your repairs are failing because you're trying to force systems to work while the ship is actively fighting you. It's like trying to fix a car while somebody keeps pulling fuses. Kallax made a sound like grinding gears. If the human is correct, and I am not conceding that it is, the solution would require extraction of all crystalline fragments and restoration of the damaged pathways, a procedure that would take months, perhaps years. Mason rubbed his chin, thinking. We don't have years. We don't even have 3 weeks. He looked up at the green alien sky, then back at the enormous ship. We need to bypass the damaged pathways, create a temporary circulatory system. Impossible, Kallax stated flatly. The Leviathan's systems are integrated at the quantum level. One cannot simply bypass them. Mason grinned, the kind of grin that had always made his ex-wife nervous. Watch me. Over the next 12 hours, Mason worked like a man possessed. He examined the ship's circulatory system, a network of conduits that carried what the aliens called phase matter, a substance that seemed to be both energy and liquid simultaneously. The crystalline fragments had caused the ship to constrict these pathways, essentially cutting off power to critical systems. After studying the schematics his neural interface could provide, Mason formulated a plan that had the alien engineers in various states of disbelief and alarm. This is lunacy, Kallax declared as Mason laid out his requirements. The human wishes to introduce foreign materials into the Leviathan's most sensitive systems. Not foreign, Mason countered. Just different. I need 50 gallons of your liquid metal, the stuff you use for adaptive repairs. Quantum-resonant nanometal is reserved for critical structural applications. Mysterial objected. It cannot be wasted on whatever this primitive procedure might be. Mason stood his ground. Your ship is dying. Your fancy repairs aren't working. Give me the metal and some space to work, or we can all sit around and watch this thing flatline. Ambassador Sci-Fi intervened before the argument could escalate. Provide Mr. Reed with what he requires. The Concordant has authorized full cooperation. Reluctantly, the engineers complied. Mason soon found himself in a maintenance bay with barrels of the strange liquid metal, which shimmered like mercury, but moved with almost eager intelligence. From his toolbox, Mason withdrew his secret weapon, 6 rolls of heavy-duty duct tape. "What is this material?" asked a crystalline technician who had been assigned to assist him. "This," Mason said with reverence, "is duct tape, humanity's greatest invention." He tore off a strip with his teeth. "It's like your nanometal, but low-tech and a hell of a lot more reliable." For the next 4 hours, Mason worked on creating what he called a bypass graft. He discovered that the alien liquid metal had an unexpected reaction to the adhesive on the duct tape instead of rejecting it. The nanometal bonded with it, creating a flexible, incredibly strong hybrid material that retained the adaptive properties of the metal, but with enhanced conductivity. "It's like the tape is giving the metal permission to break the rules," Mason explained to a fascinated Sci-Fi, who had stayed to observe his work. "Your metal wants to follow quantum protocols, but the tape doesn't know quantum protocols exist, so together they just work." By the time Mason was ready to implement his solution, word had spread throughout the ship. A crowd of alien engineers and technicians gathered to watch what many of them considered to be either a moment of human brilliance or catastrophic hubris. The plan was relatively simple. Mason had created a series of bypass conduits using his duct tape nanometal hybrid. These would be installed at key junctions in the Leviathan's circulatory system, allowing phase matter to flow around the constricted pathways rather than through them. "This is going to feel strange," Mason warned as he prepared to install the first bypass near the quantum heart. "But if it works, it should bring your coherence levels up enough for the ship to start healing itself." "And if it does not work?" Kallax asked ominously. Mason shrugged. "Then we try something else. That's engineering. With careful precision." Mason began installing his bypasses. The hybrid material seemed to almost bond with the ship's tissues, creating seamless connections that began to pulse with the same bioluminescence as the rest of the conduits. As each bypass was completed, monitors showed small but steady increases in quantum coherence. "It's working," whispered a technician, disbelief evident in their voice. By the time Mason installed the final bypass, directly into the quantum heart itself, the ship had begun to respond. The dark patches on the heart's surface were receding, and the erratic flickering had steadied into a more regular pulse. "Quantum coherence at 62% and rising," announced a technician. "Neural pathways showing decreased resistance. The Leviathan is accepting the bypasses." A cheer went up from the gathered aliens, a cacophony of different sounds that nonetheless conveyed universal relief and celebration. Even Kallax's metal plates shifted in what might have been grudging respect. Mason sat back, exhausted but satisfied. "Give it 12 hours. Once coherence is above 80%, the ship's own healing system should kick in and start dealing with those crystal splinters." "Mr. Reed." Ambassador Sci-Fi's form pulsed with what Mason now recognized as profound gratitude. "You have potentially saved billions of lives. The Concordant will be eternally grateful." Mason wiped sweat from his brow. "Don't thank me yet. Let's make sure this patch job holds." Over the next 2 days, the Leviathan systems continued to improve. Mason's bypasses functioned better than anyone, including Mason himself, had anticipated. The duct tape nanometal hybrid not only conducted phase matter efficiently, but seemed to actively adapt to the ship's needs, strengthening where necessary and remaining flexible where required. By the third day, the ship was showing signs of consciousness, its internal lights brightening and dimming in patterns that the aliens explained were its way of communicating. "It wishes to meet you," Xylophia told Mason, who was performing maintenance on one of his bypasses. "Meet me. How does a ship meet someone?" "Through the neural interface. The Leviathan is requesting direct communion with you." Mason touched the silver disc at his temple uncertainly. "Is that safe?" "Ordinarily, a human mind would be overwhelmed by such communion," Kallax said, surprisingly without condescension. "But the Leviathan has specifically modulated its consciousness to accommodate your limitations." "Well, when you put it that way, how can I refuse?" Mason said dryly. "What do I do?" "Simply relax and open your thoughts," Xylophia instructed. "The Leviathan will do the rest." Mason sat down on the yielding floor of the maintenance bay and closed his eyes. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a presence washed over him, ancient, vast, and strangely familiar. It felt like standing in the ocean at night, aware of immense movements beneath the surface. "Human Mason Healer." Came a thought that wasn't his own. The words weren't exactly English, but his mind translated them automatically. "You have eased our pain. Glad to help." Mason thought back. "You had some nasty splinters." A sensation like amusement rippled through him. "Your solution was unexpected, unconventional, effective. We have integrated your bypasses into our systems permanently." "You've what? They were supposed to be temporary, just until you healed." "They are superior to our original pathways in many respects. The combination of your duct tape and our nanometal has created something new, something neither human nor Leviathan could have created alone." Mason felt a surge of pride at that. Well, sometimes the best solutions aren't the fanciest ones. Indeed. The presence seemed to deepen, becoming more focused. "Human Mason Healer, we have a request." "I'm listening." "The Galactic Concordant requires a pilot bond for each Leviathan. Our previous pilot was lost in the Kandarian transit. We wish you to assume this role." Mason's eyes snapped open, breaking the connection momentarily. "Me? I'm just a mechanic." Xylophia, who had been monitoring the communion, looked as surprised as her fluid features could express. "The Leviathan has chosen you as its pilot? This is unprecedented." Mason closed his eyes again, reconnecting with the ship's consciousness. "I don't know the first thing about piloting a space dragon. You understand us in ways others do not. The pilot bond does not require technical knowledge that we possess. It requires compatibility of spirit. You have this. I have a life back on Earth." Mason protested, though even as he said it, he thought of his small apartment above the garage, empty since the divorce. The occasional postcards from a daughter who'd moved to the opposite coast. The same routine, day after day. "We would not keep you from your world, but we offer you the stars." Before Mason could respond, a new urgency entered the Leviathan's thoughts. "There is more. The crystalline fragments that damaged us, they are not natural formations. They are harbingers." "Harbingers of what?" "Of entities that exist beyond conventional space-time. The crystals are their method of testing dimensional barriers, seeking weaknesses. Where they have seeded, they will eventually breach." A chill ran down Mason's spine. "And they seeded your ship. And through us, they have found the coordinates of multiple worlds, including your Earth. They will come, not immediately, but inevitably." Mason broke the connection again, turning to Xylophia with alarm. "Did you know about this, these harbinger things?" The ambassador's form rippled with distress. "There have been theories, reports from the edges of known space of anomalies that consume reality itself, but nothing confirmed. Well, consider it confirmed, Mason said grimly. According to your ship, those crystal splinters are like advanced scouts for something a lot nastier. And now, they know where Earth is. This revelation set off a flurry of activity. The Phoric Collective, with their crystalline nature, proved to have special insight into the Harbinger fragments. After extensive analysis, they confirmed the Leviathan's warning. The crystals were quantum entangled with extra-dimensional entities that fed on reality itself. They create feedback loops in the underlying structure of space-time, explained a crystalline engineer, its facets glowing with complex equations. These loops amplify until they form a breach, allowing the Harbingers to enter our dimension. And then? Mason asked. Consumption, replied the engineer simply. They feed on matter, energy, and the laws of physics themselves. A mature breach can consume an entire star system within days. Mason ran a hand through his hair. How do we stop them? Unknown. No breach has ever been successfully closed once opened. The next few days were a blur of activity. The Leviathan, now functioning at nearly full capacity thanks to Mason's bypasses, was prepared for immediate departure. Its mission, to reach the Kandarian sector before the crystalline seeds could mature into a full breach. Mason found himself caught up in preparations. Despite his initial reluctance, he agreed to form a temporary pilot bond with the Leviathan for this mission. The process was surprisingly painless, a deepening of the communion they'd already established, allowing Mason to feel the ship's systems as if they were extensions of his own body. It's like having extra limbs. He tried to explain to Xylophia, really big, quantum-powered limbs. With the Phoric Collective's guidance, Mason developed a potential countermeasure against the Harbinger breach. His duct tape nanometal hybrid had proven capable of adapting to and integrating with exotic quantum states. In theory, it might be able to disrupt the feedback loop that allowed the breach to form. You intend to seal an interdimensional rift with duct tape? Kallax asked, metal plates shifting in what Mason now recognized as the equivalent of a raised eyebrow. No, Mason replied. I intend to seal it with quantum-resonant nanometal that happens to be enhanced by duct tape. Big difference. The plan called for the creation of what Mason dubbed a cosmic muffler, a massive construct of the hybrid material that could absorb and neutralize the quantum resonance of the forming breach. If deployed at precisely the right moment, it might collapse the feedback loop before it could fully mature. With the fate of multiple worlds potentially hanging in the balance, the Leviathan departed for the Kandarian sector. The journey would take 5 days at maximum speed, what the aliens called void skimming, a form of travel that made Mason's stomach lurch in ways that even the neural interface couldn't fully compensate for. During the journey, Mason spent hours in communion with the ship, learning to feel its movements through space and guide its enormous bulk with increasingly fine control. When not piloting, he worked with the engineering team to perfect the cosmic muffler, which grew to the size of a small house in one of the Leviathan's cargo bays. Will it work? Mysterial asked on the final day of their journey, cloud forms swirling contemplatively around the completed device. Honestly, I have no idea, Mason admitted, but it's the best shot we've got. Your species embraces uncertainty with remarkable ease. The cloud being observed? Mason shrugged. Comes with the territory when you're from a backwater planet with limited resources. You learn to work with what you've got and hope for the best. Perhaps that is why the Leviathan chose you. Mysterial suggested. It has existed for millennia, navigating according to precise calculations and established protocols. You have shown it another way. Before Mason could respond, an alert sounded throughout the ship. They had arrived at the Kandarian sector. Through his bond with the Leviathan, Mason felt the ship's apprehension as they approached the crystalline nebula. The neural interface displayed readings that confirmed their fears. A quantum disturbance was forming at the heart of the nebula. A swirling vortex of fractured space-time centered around a cluster of crystalline formations identical to those that had embedded in the Leviathan's hull. "Breach status," Mason called out as he settled into what served as the pilot's position, a semi-organic cradle that enhanced his neural connection to the ship. "Approximately 78% formed," reported a technician. "Estimated time to complete breach, 17 minutes. Mason took a deep breath and fully opened himself to the pilot bond. The Leviathan's senses became his own. He could feel the radiation from the nebula against the ship's hull, taste the quantum fluctuations in the surrounding space, see in spectrums far beyond human perception. "Deploy the muffler," he ordered, "and everyone hold on to something. This is gonna get weird." The cargo bay doors opened, and the massive construct of duct tape and nanometal was ejected into space. The Leviathan extended tendrils of energy, extensions of its wings that existed partly in higher dimensions to guide the muffler toward the forming breach. As they approached the heart of the disturbance, reality itself seemed to warp. Stars smeared across Mason's enhanced vision, and the laws of physics became suggestions rather than rules. Through the bond, he felt the Leviathan struggling to maintain its integrity against forces that sought to unravel its very existence. "We need to get closer," Mason gritted through clenched teeth. "The muffler needs to be at the focal point of the feedback loop." "Impossible," Kallax warned. "At that proximity, the quantum distortions will tear the Leviathan apart." Mason felt the ship's agreement, and beneath it, a determination that matched his own. "We've got one shot at this. If we fail, Earth, and who knows how many other worlds, will face these things eventually." With a thought, Mason urged the Leviathan forward, deeper into the distortion field. Alarms blared throughout the ship as systems struggled against impossible physics. Through the bond, Mason felt pain, the ship's pain as its recently healed pathways began to strain. "Just a little more," he murmured, both to the ship and to himself. Almost there, at the heart of the disturbance. Mason could see it, a twisting, fractal tear in reality, pulsing with colors that shouldn't exist. Beyond it, something vast and hungry waited, reaching tendrils of non-matter toward our dimension, with precise timing honed through decades of mechanical work. Mason guided the Leviathan to release the muffler at the exact focal point of the breach. The hybrid construct unfurled like a flower, its duct tape nanometal surface beginning to absorb the quantum resonance that fed the breach. For one terrible moment, nothing happened. The breach continued to widen, and through his enhanced senses, Mason felt alien awareness turn toward them, ancient, cold, and ravenous. Then the muffler began to glow. The hybrid material, caught in the feedback loop, didn't break down as expected. Instead, it integrated with the loop itself, rerouting the energy, creating a new pattern that spiraled inward rather than outward. The breach began to collapse. "It's working," shouted a technician. Mason had no time to celebrate. "Full reverse. Get us out of here now." The Leviathan responded instantly, its massive form pivoting with surprising grace and accelerating away from the collapsing breach. Behind them, the distortion field imploded, sending a shockwave of quantum energy across the nebula. The wave caught them despite their speed, washing over the ship like a tsunami. Systems flickered, and for a heart-stopping moment, Mason feared they'd lose power entirely. But his bypasses held, rerouting energy around damaged pathways, keeping the ship's critical systems online. As they cleared the nebula, cheers erupted throughout the ship. Displays showed the breach collapsing completely, the feedback loop disrupted beyond recovery. The harbinger, whatever it was, had been denied entry to their reality. Mason sagged in the pilot's cradle, exhausted but triumphant. Through the bond, he felt the Leviathan's equivalent of exhilaration, a cascading harmony of neural patterns that resonated with his own relief. Well done. Human Mason pilot, came the ship's thoughts. We have faced the void together and emerged victorious. Does this mean I get hazard pay on top of that $1 million? Mason thought back with weary humor. The Leviathan's response carried the alien equivalent of laughter. Perhaps the Concordant can be persuaded. The return journey to the Galactic Concordant's central station took another 7 days, during which the Leviathan underwent repairs for damage sustained during the breach closure. Mason's bypasses had proven their worth under extreme conditions, and the alien engineers, even Kalax, now studied them with genuine interest rather than skepticism. The hybrid material exhibits properties we had not thought possible, Mysterial explained as they examined data from the muffler's performance. It creates a state of quantum ambiguity that allowed it to interface with the breach on multiple dimensional levels simultaneously. Duct tape, Mason said with a grin. Told you it was humanity's greatest invention. Upon their arrival at the Concordant station, a massive structure that resembled a blooming flower made of metal and light, Mason was hailed as a hero. Representatives from dozens of spacefaring civilizations gathered to hear the account of how a human mechanic had not only saved the Leviathan but potentially prevented a catastrophic interdimensional incursion. The Concordant's High Council, a body of 9 beings so advanced they appeared as little more than shifting patterns of light, formally recognized Mason's contribution and awarded him not only the promised $1 million equivalent but also the title of Quantum Harmonizer, apparently a significant honor among the galaxy's engineering elite. Mr. Reed, announced the council speaker, a being whose voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. The Concordant extends its deepest gratitude for your service. Few beings in our history have demonstrated such resourcefulness in the face of unprecedented challenges. Mason, dressed in a ceremonial robe that had been provided for the occasion, though he'd insisted on keeping his work boots, bowed awkwardly. Just doing what needed doing, though I wouldn't have gotten far without the Leviathan's help. Indeed, the speaker continued, we understand a unique bond has formed between you and the Void Wing. The Leviathan has formally requested that you continue as its pilot bond partner. A murmur ran through the assembled dignitaries. Such an arrangement was unprecedented. Leviathan pilots were typically chosen from species with centuries of space travel experience, not from a world that had barely reached its own moon. The Council has deliberated on this request, the speaker said. Given the circumstances and the clear compatibility demonstrated, we are inclined to approve this appointment. Should you accept it? Mason felt all eyes, and various sensory appendages turned toward him. Through his neural interface, he felt the Leviathan's presence, waiting patiently for his decision. What exactly would that entail? Mason asked cautiously. You would serve as an ambassador of both humanity and the Concordant, explained Xylophia, who stood nearby. The Leviathan would be assigned diplomatic missions throughout known space, with you as its guide and voice. It is a position of great honor and responsibility. Mason thought of Earth, the garage in New Mexico, the quiet life he'd built there. Then he thought of what he'd experienced in just 2 weeks among the stars, saving a living spaceship with duct tape, facing down an interdimensional horror, seeing wonders no human had ever witnessed. Could I visit Earth sometimes? He asked. I've got a daughter I'd like to see once in a while. Of course, the speaker confirmed. Regular contact with your homeworld would be encouraged. Indeed, you would serve as a valuable liaison as humanity continues its development toward joining the galactic community. Mason nodded slowly. In that case, I accept, on one condition. Name it. I get to keep my toolbox. Never know when you might need a roll of duct tape. Laughter, in various alien forms, rippled through the chamber. The speaker's light pattern shifted in what might have been amusement. A reasonable condition. Quantum Harmonizer Reed. So it is agreed? 2 months later, Mason stood in his garage in Socorro, New Mexico. boxing up the last of his belongings. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the concrete floor where he'd spent countless hours fixing everything from lawn mowers to luxury cars. He picked up a framed photo, himself and his daughter Emma at her college graduation 3 years ago. He'd called her when he returned to Earth, trying to explain where he'd been and what he'd agreed to. To his surprise, after the initial shock, she'd been supportive. "Dad, you've been fixing other people's broken things your whole life," she'd said. "Maybe it's time you had an adventure of your own." A soft humming sound outside drew his attention. Mason stepped through the open garage door and looked up. Hovering above his property, invisible to anyone without the special lenses he now wore, was the Leviathan. Its massive form shimmered slightly in the New Mexico heat. Wings folded into dimensions human eyes couldn't perceive. Mason shouldered his duffel bag, packed with clothes, photos, and a dozen fresh rolls of duct tape, and grinned up at his new partner. "Ready when you are," he said. A beam of light enveloped him, and Mason Reed, mechanic from Socorro, rose toward the stars, leaving behind a closed indefinitely sign swinging gently on the garage door. Through the neural interface he now wore permanently, he felt the Leviathan's greeting, a complex harmony of thought and emotion that his mind translated simply as, "Welcome home, Mason Pilot." As Earth dwindled beneath them and the vast canvas of space unfolded ahead, Mason felt a sense of rightness settle over him. He might be just a human with a toolbox and some duct tape, but sometimes that was exactly what the universe needed. "Where to first?" he asked. "The Concordant has received reports of quantum disturbances in the Cygnus arm," came the response. "Similar to what we encountered in the Kandarian sector." Mason nodded, determination replacing any lingering doubts. "Then that's where we're headed. Can't have interdimensional monsters eating reality, can we?" The Leviathan's consciousness resonated with agreement. Its massive form shifted, orienting toward distant stars, and then, with a ripple of space-time that Mason was only beginning to understand, they were gone, leaving nothing behind but a faint shimmer in the afternoon sky. In a garage in Socorro, a final strip of duct tape held down a note on the door. "Gone to fix the universe. Back when the job's done."